Hello everyone and welcome back to another autumn coloured pencil studies tutorial. Grab whatever pencils and paper you have and let's jump straight into it. Okay, so I'm using the exact same page of my sketchbook that I used for the previous three little studies that we did, the mushroom, the acorn and the tree branch. And I'm using the exact same pencil to start the next one, which is my standard just graphite Staedtler pencil. 2B, but it really doesn't matter that much. As long as you can make a nice light outline, then it's all good. And the first study we're going to do this time is of this leaf, which is sort of on the turn. It's got a little bit of a yellow-orange tone to it, but it still has some of its green colour as well. So I thought it'd be quite interesting because it's got all the different tones in there. And it's also like slightly folded inwards, so it's not like a perfectly symmetrical leaf, which to be honest is half the reason that I chose this reference, because when you're starting out learning to draw, the hardest thing you can do is try to draw something that's symmetrical, at least this way. If we don't get all these little tiny bits in the right place, it's not the end of the world and it'll still look pretty good. Okay, so once again, I just want to look at the overall shape of this leaf. I'm not being too picky about all the little details in it just yet. And the first thing that I'm going to do is draw that central part of the leaf and then we can see where that is. So let's have a look. I'm going to start from about there and I'm going to bring it to about there. Again, I'm not going to do this too big, just make sure that you can see that nice and clearly. And then I'm going to have a look for the shape of the rest of the leaf, so I'm going to bring a little bit of a line across there, do a little bit of one up there, and then I'm just going to go around the edge of all those different bits. We can add the details back in afterwards. That sort of comes down there. Okay, again, looks a little bit weird at the minute. Let's just give it a little bit of a dab with our eraser, using the Faber-Castell putty eraser again. Don't get any of those dirty, annoying little bits that come off. So we can just about see what we did originally, and now I'm going to go back in, do my more refined outline, and just start mapping everything in. That little bit there. And I'm going to try my best to be accurate with these little edges of the leaf, but I'm not going to be too worried if they're not all exactly in the right place. Like I said, we're not drawing a symmetrical leaf, so it wouldn't be the end of the world if they were a little bit off. Great to practice drawing a leaf that's a little bit crumpled up. It's not perfect. And if you do make a mistake and you want to correct it, you can just easily erase and start again. So just going to bring that down there, bring that bit up, and then a little bit there. So I'm just going to have a quick sit back, check that everything's in the right place. I might make those a little bit deeper. okay, that looks pretty good to me. And I'm also just going to start adding a few of these really tiny little lines that you can see in the leaf. So I'm just adding the main ones. I'm not going adding all these teeny tiny little ones that come off it. I'm just going to add the main bits that I can see, because we are going to add these for a little bit of detail. Then they sort of like alternate, so there's a little one there, one there. So you're sort of doing one at each side every other one. One there. One just there. And there. Okie dokie, I'm pretty pleased with that for a outline. And like I've been saying, I don't want to go spending hours and hours trying to get it perfect. There's always variation and different shapes and sizes in nature, so I think that passes off for a leaf well enough for me. So now I'm gonna do a little bit of a dab again with my putty eraser. Get rid of that initial outline so that we can just about see it. We're going to go in with our coloured pencils now. Okie dokie, so I can just about see the outline. And once again, the first thing that I'm going to do is focus on that middle line down there. It's really clear to see, so I feel like it's always a good place to start with something that's clear and easy to see. So I'm going to use the same lighter brown colour that I used in the first part of this series, the Nougat 178, but once again, if you don't have polychromos from Faber-Castell, don't feel like you have to use the same ones. Just use a lighter brown, like a mid-brown, lighter brown colour. And I'm going to use this to start picking out that middle part of the leaf. And I'm just going to bring that down here. And while the little veiny bits are a bit lighter at the bottom end of the leaf, it doesn't matter too much because I'm going to use a tiny eraser to pick out those lighter bits. So we'll just map it in with this colour and then we'll pick it out a little bit more later. But the lighter the hand, the more easily we'll be able to do that. So don't press too hard for this bit. You're just touching the paper with a nice sharp pencil and just lightly picking out those little details. I'm going to do the same thing with these little bits. Just a very light hand. Like that. And then for the outer part of the leaf, I think I'll use a green colour just so that we don't go too dark too quickly. And I'm going to use the same green that we used in the last video as well, the May Green 170. But once again, just use any green that you've got. We will be using a darker one on top of this in a few steps, so just keep that in mind. You want to have a darker green as well, so a slightly lighter one to begin with. And I'm going to go around the outside edge. Just going to dab that away a little bit more. Left it on a bit strong there. And just going back over what we've already done. Adding a little bit more of a line. Okie dokie. So you should have something like that. Doesn't need to be exactly the same as mine, but something along those lines. Okie dokie. So next I am going to keep hold of the same green, my May Green 170, and I'm going to do a base coat all over the leaf to get that nice green undertone, because overall this leaf, I would say, is more on the green side, even though there's little bits of it that have gone a bit brown, a little bit yellow in places. It's pretty green overall. So just doing a very light little wash of green all over. Thank you very much for the positive feedback in the last video. I was really impressed by how much everyone loved it. I didn't expect it to do so well. So yeah, thank you. Lovely comments, and I loved seeing your work on Instagram and anywhere that you tagged me. So if you do draw some of these and you'd love to share it online, then please do tag me. I'd love to see it on Instagram or Facebook or wherever. I think when we're all so busy, it's nice to do a little study that's not going to take you all day. You can do it in an hour at the evening or whenever you have a little bit of spare time. So it's little bite-sized pieces that you can do. And I think sometimes that's what we're all craving. It'd be lovely to sit down and do a full length tutorial on something, but every now and then it's nice, especially if you're a beginner and starting from scratch, it's nice to do something a bit simpler and a little bit quicker that can help to build your confidence. So that is enough there. I might add a little bit into the stalk actually. There's a bit of a green undertone. Yeah, there we go. And I'm just going to go back to the Nougat 178, the lighter brown colour, and I'm just going to go over the stalk, add a little bit more detail and depth. Darken that up. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to darken up some of these little bits and start adding a little bit of shading. So around here there's definitely a little bit of a brown tone. So we're going to start to add some more shape into this leaf now. So just focusing that there. I'm going to also blend it straight across. Don't worry about the lighter bit on that vein, because we're going to use a tiny little eraser to pick that back out. So I'll just blend in around there, using a really light hand so that it's really soft and well blended. Just doing little side to side motions, not really lifting the pencil off, just leaving it on, building that up. And I'm going to do the same on the edge of the leaf here. I'm just going to do a little outline just to frame it. Bring that down there a little. And let's go around the whole top, that part there as well. Over this little bit here. And I'm going to start to shade in from the edge, because if you look here it's a little bit darker and more brown on the edge. So just bringing that in, doing really soft little bits of shading. definitely need some down this bit here as well. It's quite brown through the middle of the leaf, and the more that we do of this, the more shape we're going to start to see form in this leaf. So leaves can be very, very overwhelming and a little bit daunting because of all these little veins and bits of detail, but you don't have to add every little bit of detail, especially if you're drawing something like a branch with leaves on it. You don't necessarily need all of the tiny little veins. Like if you look really closely at this leaf, there's teeny tiny little veins coming off of these bits, and I just don't want to add those. I don't think it would add that much more to the drawing. Just gonna add a little bit of shading here. So the great thing with art and drawing and realism art is that you can pick and choose what you want to add. You can subtract details, you can add more if it's a little bit of a rubbish photo, but a lot of the time you don't need as much detail as you might think. I'm going to blend it out a bit more there. Then let's do a little bit on the edge here. Blending in. And going to blend a bit more over here. So I'm just doing it one little bit at a time, looking for areas that are more brown and gradually building up that shape. So we definitely need a little bit in here as well. And I am sort of blending in the direction of the leaf, so the leaf's going this way now, slightly downwards, and it is a little bit easier and blends in a little bit better if you do that. And I'm going to add a little bit more to the edge here. I add a tiny bit there. And I'm going to add a bit through the middle here. A little bit here. And a little bit down here. Okie dokie, I'm now going to use a tiny little eraser. This is just a rubber pencil I got from Amazon, not overly expensive at all, very cheap. And you can sharpen it and just pick out little details with the eraser. So, like I said, some of these are a little bit lighter, these little veins in the leaf. So I'm going to use the very point of the eraser and just pick out those little lighter bits. So that they stand out. Do a little bit here. I usually use a Tombow Mono Zero eraser, but I just went to use it today and I've run out of eraser. I need to get some more inserts, so never mind. This one works just as well, it's just not quite as pointy sometimes. Do a little bit here. Do a little bit on the right hand side of that darker line. A little bit there. Okay, then I might just add a little bit more May Green 170, the green colour, and I'm just going to blend a little bit around those lighter parts just so that they stand out a little bit more, and just add a little bit more green into the leaf. So we're just tidying up the shape. You might want to just bring it in a little bit more so that it's a little bit smaller and neater. Just making sure it's nice and tidy. I won't spend too long on this. Okay, let's now add a little bit of a yellow colour. Like I said, there's little hints of yellow, especially on those edges where it's like starting to change colour a little bit. So I'm just going to use, again, the exact same ochre colour that I used in the first video, the Dark Naples Ochre 184. Just going to use that again. I'm not being overly fussy with the colour, just as long as it's a bit of a yellow colour, then it's all good. And I'm just going to start to blend that into anywhere that has a little bit more of a yellow tone. So on these edges, and I'm also going to go down these little veins to give them a bit more of a yellow colour so that they don't look too light. Definitely see a yellow undertone in there. And a little bit more on that edge. Adds a lot more of a vibrant colour to the leaf. Looks really nice. And a little bit there. It's not that yellow though, so I won't add too much. Okay. I think it's time to add a little bit of a darker green colour, so I'm going to use Chrome Oxide Green 278, which as you can see is quite a bit darker than the May Green, and I use this a lot in foliage, so it's a really good colour to have. I use it in a lot of my tutorials, but use any dark green that you've got. It doesn't really matter too much, just go with what you've got. Don't be held back if you don't have the exact same colours, and I'm just going to start looking for areas that are a little bit darker, just really softly blending that in. And this is where the leaf is really going to start to take shape. So I'll blend in a little bit in around here. Gonna go around that little vein. A little bit around here. And again, I'm not being too worried about all these teeny tiny little details. I'm just gonna simplify it a little bit. As long as we get the values and the colours and the shape pretty accurate, then we don't need to worry too much about all the tiny little details. Okay, so let's see. A little bit darker here. A little bit there. A little bit on this side. Just going to go around the vein a little bit more. And then a little bit in here. And in here. Using a really light hand so it blends in nice and soft. Let's go around that little vein again, then I can see it. Okie dokie, I feel like before we do anything else, we need to darken up the darker brown areas. It looks a little bit flat, so I'm going to use my darker brown that we used in the previous video, again, the burnt umber 280, so just a dark brown. And I'm going to darken up this little stalk. Could do with being quite a little bit darker, this little bit here. I'm going to bring it right down the middle. Just soften that up a little bit. Okay, and then I'm going to start from the edges here. Start to darken up these little brown bits. Add a little bit more depth, a little bit more texture. Shade it in. So anywhere that's got a little bit more of a dark brown colour to it, darken this little line up a tad. And I'm going to add a little bit more shading through the middle bit. A little bit here. And I'm going to add that little darker patch. Anywhere there's these little darker bits, I am going to add those in. Apply a little bit more pressure and just try and get a little bit more detail and interest. I know that we're not trying to add too much detail, but a few little bits like this will help to make it look like you've made way more effort than you actually have. Add a little bit more of this here. Shade it in a little bit more. So we're doing a little bit of a mixture of like shading to get these slightly darker bits, but also little taps with the pencil to get these little bits of texture and little bumps. So I'm going to carry on around this top bit. A little bit more through this bit. A little bit down here. Definitely need a little bit there, I've missed a bit. A little bit here. there. Okie dokie. And I am going to add a few more of these little darker bits, little taps with my pencil. Even if I can't see any, I might just add them in random places just to get a little bit more detail. Might just darken that edge up a little bit more. A little bit here. Okay, I think we need a bit more of the green colours. I might just add a little bit more May Green 170, the lighter green, and a little bit more of that first. So our main aim now is just to sort of smooth everything out, filling in any last little bits of grain in the paper. Might need to just tidy up these little veins a tiny bit more. And I might add a little bit more of the ochre colour, the dark Naples ochre 184. I feel like we could have a little bit more of that on the edges especially. Just going to apply a tiny bit more pressure. Okay, and then I'm going to add a little bit more of the Oxide green, the darker green, so 278. And I'm just going to add that anywhere I feel like I need a little bit more shape, a little bit more dimension. So definitely a bit more there. A little bit more at this side. A bit more there. there. Yeah, and then I might just add a little tiny bit more of the brown colours. I might add the Nougat to begin with, so the lighter brown, Nougat 178, and just going to add a little tiny bit more into the edges of the leaves, wherever it's a little bit more brown. It'll be very subjective at this point, whatever you feel like you need in your drawing. Just go back through the colours, repeat the same processes and just get it to the point that you're happy with. I could spend all day just perfecting this leaf, but I don't want to go on for too long because, like I said, this is just a way of practicing and experimenting without being too precious about each study so that you can get as many different subjects in as possible. A bit more there. And a little bit more burnt umber 280. Just going to add that on top just to darken it up a little bit there. And let's add a tiny bit more there. Let's darken it up with a bit of dark Sepia 175, that really dark browny grey colour that we used again in the first video. Just a few little bits that I think need an extra bit of depth to make this look a bit more realistic. So just on the end of that stalk there. A little bit along there. Going to darken up these little patches and bits of texture. And then I'm going to darken up a few of these little edges, but not too much. I'm not trying to press super hard. Just a very subtle little bit of shadow. A little bit there maybe. A little bit here. blend a little bit in. Tiny bit there. And anywhere on the leaf where you feel like it could do with just that little bit more depth, a little bit more texture. Add a few little dots and stuff. Okie dokie. Again, it's very subjective at this point. You can add a little bit more detail if you want to, or leave it if you're not too bothered. I'm pretty pleased with that. I might at the end up going in and like tweaking everything a little bit, but to be honest, these are studies for practice and learning. We're not trying to make them absolutely perfect. I mean, if you want to, you can just lighten a few little bits up with the little eraser if you feel like you've gone a bit too dark anywhere, but like I said earlier, leaves are all different. No two leaves are the same. They have different colours, different levels of depth, so if your leaf is looking a little bit darker than the reference, then it's all good, and if not, then that's also good. I feel like that looks pretty nice. Might just lighten it up a bit in places. Okay, gonna leave that one there for now. Okay, so the next study we're going to do is this plum that I picked from the tree in the garden. We've got a plum tree, and every year it grows these lovely bluey purple toned plums. So this will be a fun one because there's some different colours in there that we've not yet used. So once again, I'm going to take my graphite pencil. Once again, I'm just going to map in a basic shape, and this one's very basic because it's pretty much just a circle, but it's got a little bit of an asymmetric shape to it, so it's not like perfectly round. So I think that will do. I'm not going to do it too big. Just a nice small little study. I'm going to put the stalk there. Okay, and then using my putty eraser, I'm just lifting off the colour. Well, the pencil. I'm so used to saying colour. Lifting off the graphite and doing a bit more of a tighter, refined little outline. So there's like a little bit of a line that runs down the middle of the plum there. I don't want that to stand out too much. And it's going to get the shape of it. It really doesn't matter if it's not the exact same shape, as long as it's a little bit asymmetric so it doesn't look too boring and perfect, then it's all good. I don't like things to look too perfect. It has a little bit of a dip inwards at the bottom. Might just make that stick out a little bit more. Okie dokie. I think that's all we need for that really. It's pretty straightforward and simple. So let's once again give this a little tap, get rid of any outlines. So that we can just about see them to start adding a little bit of colour. So once again, I'm going to use that green colour, the lighter green, the May Green 170, and I'm going to go over the stalk. It's definitely got a green undertone to it. There we go. So the plum itself, like I said, it's got some blues and some purples. So I might use a little bit of Dark Indigo 157, which is just a dark blue colour. So any dark blue will do. And I'm just going to take this on the outside of the plum, just to add a little bit of a guideline, really gently and softly again. Not trying to press on too hard. There we go. And I might just add a tiny little bit of a guideline down the middle. And I'd rather go in with a slightly lighter base colour to begin with for this. I'm going to do the same thing again where we use the white on top to add a little bit of a highlight, because again it's quite a dull highlight, it's not overly white and crisp and sharp, so I'm quite happy to use a white pencil on top to pick out all these little bits. So I'm going to start with a lovely pale blue colour. I'm going to use the Sky Blue 146, which is just like a really pale, soft sky blue colour like the name suggests. And I'm just going to take this all over the plum as a nice little base layer. Just making sure that's nice and smooth, not pressing too hard, but going over it a few times, then it's not too grainy. That's a good starting point. And then I would love to add a little bit of that purple tone to begin with, and then we can see where all of these different purple bits are. I'm going to use a bit of Caput Mortuum 169, which is like a little bit of a purple red tone. So any sort of purple will work for this. If you don't have this exact sort of tone, don't worry, just a purple colour will do. So just blending this in, looking for any little purple bits, and just going over those. I love this colour. This is such a good colour for drawing things in nature and animals. A lot of animals have these sort of tones as well. This like reddy purple colour. So I'm going to try and keep the bluer areas blue and just focus this more on the purple bits. So this little bit there, and again this is like a shiny object. Well, it feels weird calling it an object, but you know what I mean. It's a shiny texture, and trying to make it look round and shiny with the shape. So we've got to be quite careful where we place all of our colours. But adding the white at the end is definitely going to help to make it look rounder. So just blending over here. add another few layers. Make it really nice and rich. A few little bits over here. A little bit more here. And if you're using a slightly more purple colour, it might look more purple than mine, but that's absolutely fine. Doesn't matter if it looks a little bit of a different colour, just use what you've got. Some of the plums were a little bit more purple, some were more blue, some were a bit more grey. They were all quite different, but I really liked this one because of the sort of combination of both the blue and purple. So I could always add a little bit more of that later if need be, but I'm gonna go back to the dark indigo 157, my dark blue colour, and I'm gonna start to add a little bit more of that inside the plum. So blending that over the top of that slightly purple tone, just add in a little bit more depth, and when this mixes with that reddy purple colour, it helps to make it look even more like rich and purple. So there's various different ways that you could do something like this. You could, like I say, you could use more of a purple colour, but I quite like the slightly redder tones that I can see sort of hidden within this plum. I keep wanting to say peach, I don't know why. It's not a peach. So just bringing that around there a little bit. And if you look really closely, there's like little lines and bits of texture going in all sorts of different directions. So I'm gonna start just doing more little squiggles and lines going in different directions to try and build up more of a natural texture. But always remembering that I'm trying to form the rounded shape, so paying attention to where the darker bits are. And I am going to leave that little highlight bit in the middle a tiny bit lighter if I can. Just when we add that white, it'll go on a little bit lighter then. Bring this up here. Blending that in a little bit. On that left hand side, it's definitely a little bit darker because the light source was coming from this way. So I'll just add a little bit more there. Blend it in a little bit more. Add a little bit more there. And if need be, you can add a little bit more of the lighter blue if you feel like it looks a little bit gappy, using my Sky Blue 146. Just feel like in the middle there it could just do with a little bit more to fill those gaps. A little bit there. Okay, and I might just go back to my slightly purple tone colour, my Caput Mortuum 169. Might just go back and add a little bit more of that. Try not to go outside the lines. Trying to make it look really rich and dark now. A little bit more there. And there. And I might add a little bit more of that dark indigo again. 157, the dark blue. I just want to darken up that left hand side. I'm going to apply a tiny bit more pressure now. Really go in. Create a bit more shape. A little bit here. Really trying to make this nice and smooth and rich. Okay. And I'm going to add a few more little bits at the top. Then I'm going to add some dark Sepia 175, that really dark brown, almost grey colour. I feel like we could do with a little bit of this to darken up this bottom part. Let's blend that in a little bit. A little bit at the top there. around here. A little bit up here. A little bit here. A little bit on this left side. A few little bits just to add a bit of texture, and then let's do the stalk. And I can definitely see a darker brown colour. Let's use the Nougat first. We'll use the lighter brown to add a little bit of shape, and then we'll go on top of it with a darker brown. So the light brown colour, Nougat 178. I'm going to add a tiny little bit of shape into the stalk. Add a little bit of detail. Nothing too crazy. Just anywhere you can see a little bit more of a brown tone. Then let's darken that up with the Burnt Umber 280. Only need the tiniest little bit of this now, just on that very edge there. A little bit on the top. Just blended that in. And I am thinking I need more of that purple red tone in the plum itself, so I will just go back to that Caput Mortuum 169 a little bit more. Let's blend that in. Sometimes you just need multiple layers of the same colour. A little bit more through there. Okay, and now let's finish off. We'll add a little bit of white and see how it's looking. So I'm going to use the Polychromos white, but again, use whatever white you have. So white 101, and I'm just going to take that over the highlight just to brighten that up, and it gives it that dull sort of look that the reference has, so I'm not too worried about that on this occasion. Like I say, if I was doing something that had a bit more of a crisp white bright highlight, I would leave the paper white or go over it with a bit of white gel pen, but this is quite a velvety sort of texture. It's not really super shiny and glossy. So a little bit of that over there. And then I'm also going to do a little bit of a line down the middle. Just to indicate where the centre of that plum is. There's definitely a little bit of a lighter edge just there. So just blending that in. A little bit on this bottom right edge. I love the velvety look that it gives adding the white on this. And I'm going to add some little bits up here. A little bit up there. So it does work well with this because it has got that more velvety sort of texture, but I wouldn't always use white on top like that. A little bit more there. more at the bottom. A little bit more there. And I think I'm pretty pleased with that. I think that looks good. Feel free to go back in and add any more colours that you want to. Might add a bit of dark indigo just to tidy up. That left side a little bit more if need be. Blend it back in a bit. And I might just add a little bit more of the Caput Mortuum 169, that purple colour. Okay, and I'm going to leave that study there. Okay, so the final piece that we're going to draw in this video is this duck feather that I found on the ground in the garden. We're very fortunate and have got a pond in the garden where lots and lots of ducks love to call their home because they get fed very well here, and in the springtime we get lots of ducklings and they're so cute. So there's often lots of duck feathers lying around, and I thought this would be a really fun one to draw because feathers are a completely different texture to anything else that we've drawn so far. So once again, grab your graphite pencil and we're going to look for the basic shape of this feather. So I'm going to do the exact same thing that we did with the leaf, where we start from that central part of the feather, draw that little line that runs through the middle of it. And again, don't worry too much about the angle. It doesn't need to be perfect. I'll just move that up a little bit there. Try not to make it too big. Okay, I think that looks about right. So let's now do the basic shape of the feather. So it comes down here, comes out a little bit more there. So I'm just doing right to the edge of where all those little tiny fluffy bits are. Looks a bit like a leaf, but we're going to erase this a little bit so that we can just see it, and we're going to refine the shape of it a little bit more. So where that little bottom bit is, I'm just going to make that a bit thicker. And then I'm going to bring that up. So it just tapers to a very thin line at the top. Then let's start from the top bit, and about halfway up, maybe a little bit over half, is where this little bit splits off. So we'll use that as a guide for this top section. I'm going to come round the top, and again at this side there's like a little bit where it splits off around there. So just go to the top, and then it sort of has a little bit of a flatter edge to it there. So again, let's add this next little bit here that sort of finishes there, and it's very soft and fluffy. So I'm just going to do a little bit of a fluffy few strokes just to indicate where that is. Bring that down there, and then it's like 3 little fluffy bits that I'm just going to map in there like that. Let's do the same on this left side, just add that little bit where it splits off. A few little fluffy bits underneath it, and then they start going in all sorts of different directions here. So just going to do a very vague little guide as to where all those little fluffy bits are going. We can always change them when we add our coloured pencil, but just adds a little bit of a guide. Don't be afraid to cross them over, do them in different directions. We don't want them to all be very uniform and in the same place because that'll just look silly. So just bring some more across. I've sort of combined those two bits there, but when we start to add our colour we can break it up a little bit more. So the next thing that we need to add in is where these little patterns are in the feather. So there's a darker bit down the centre, so let's just do a little bit of a line just off the centre there. Oh, needs to taper in a bit sooner. Like that. And then one down this side. Like that. And then let's add a little bit of a line just coming off the left-hand edge where that lighter bit is. And then we'll add one more little line in the middle, which is where that darker bit here ends. Comes up there a little bit. So there's the outer edge, there's the line where the lighter bit ends and this darker bit begins, and then we've got another lighter bit and then the centre. So it's a little bit confusing, but when we start to add our colour we'll be able to see what's going on a little bit better. So again, on this side I'm going to add a little bit of a line to show where this lighter bit is on the edge. And then we've got another little line just about here where there's a little lighter bit there. So if you're a bit confused, don't worry, we'll break it down more with the coloured pencils. Might just bring that up there a little bit more and bring that up a tad more. Then there's a bit more space at the bottom. But again, all feathers are different, all feathers will break off in different places, so it doesn't really matter if yours isn't exactly like the photo. There we go, I think that is enough of a starting point for now. Let's use the Nougat 178 as our first colour, so the lighter brown colour, and I'm going to just dab away our guidelines to reveal a very pale outline to start working on top of. So I'm going to go around the outside edge of the feather. Make sure your pencil is super sharp. You want to be very light with this because feathers are very, very fluffy and light. We're not trying to do any really harsh edges, just enough that we can see where everything is. Just do that little bit through the middle. We'll do the next little bit that sort of comes to a point in the middle there. I'm going to add the next little line on the left, and then that last little bit there. So on this right hand side we've got the line that goes around the lighter bit, and then we've got the line that goes around the lighter bit just next to the edge. Then let's go back to these little bits that are sticking out, just go around those. And then again, I'm going to just do some really soft, fluffy little strokes that all curl round and go in different directions, just coming off the feather there. Add a few slightly longer strokes from the middle. And then same on this side, let's do that little bit there. A little bit underneath. And then do a few little bits. Okie dokie. So you should have something that looks like that, but don't worry too much if yours doesn't quite have all these details. If you want, you can just get rid of all the details and do it the same colour, but try your best to get those in because it is good practice trying to get all these little fiddly details. I think when we start to break it down with some base colours, it'll help to show which bit's which a little bit more clearly. So let's start out with a really pale yellow colour as an undertone for these yellow areas. So I'm going to use the Ivory 103, the colour that I used in the mushroom at the beginning of the first video. And because it is so pale, there is a little bit of an orange tone as well, but I think we need that really pale yellow for those bits to stand out. So the Ivory 103, I'm just going to take that on the end of that little broken bit and the edge of the top bit there. And then there's a darker bit in the middle and then a slightly lighter bit just there. So it goes light, dark, dark, and then light here, and then light again on the edge. Just make sure you've got rid of all those original graphite pencil marks. So light again on the edge. So that makes it a little bit clearer. I'm going to bring that down a little bit more there. And then for the rest of it, I can see quite like a grey undertone. That's a little bit warm grey. So let's go with the lightest of the warm greys, the warm grey one, 270. And just use any pale, warmer grey colour that you've got. Something along the lines of this. And I'm going to take that over the rest of the feather, blending it up through this middle bit. There's definitely a bit of a warm grey undertone, like underneath all of these browns. So I think this is a really nice base colour to use. I use this colour a lot in my wildlife art, my pet portraits, anything with nature. You want these sort of neutral colours, they're really helpful. I'm going to blend that through there. And I'm going to start to bring some really fluffy little strokes through these broken sections. Going over all these little bits adds a nice softness and a little bit of a grey undertone. I'm going to go down this middle bit and then same on this side. Just going to add some little soft feathery bits, just come in from the centre in the direction of these little bits. Okay, so let's now add a little bit of the light brown again. We're going to start to add a little bit of detail and depth into these feathers. So I'm using the Nougat 178 and I'm just going in, doing some little strokes, and anywhere where it's a little bit more brown toned, just blending some little strokes through like that. So again, here, doing some little strokes through this brown area. Just blending that through. And then as we get further up, it's pretty dark, so I'm just going to shade it in. You can't really see much of a direction. It's more these lighter bits at the bottom that you want a bit more of a clear direction. And I'm going to bring that up here, blend it up the top. And then going to start doing some little strokes once again in the direction of the feathers. So on this right side, they come from the left to the right. So whether you want to do left to right strokes or right to left strokes, it's up to you, but I'm finding this a little bit easier to do left to right because I'm right-handed. And I might just darken it up a little bit on that left side. And then gradually want to bring them down here, and then they start to come from the centre of the feather just there. And then want to start bringing this up the middle bit, so from the centre of the feather once again to the right and to that lighter yellow part. So you've got to trust the process with this one. It's all about direction and softness. So as long as you can get those two pretty accurate, then it should look like a feather when we're done. So same on this side, doing little strokes from the centre of the feather to that yellow part. And then just finish off that little bit there. Might just darken up that line down the middle a little bit more. And on this side, I'm just going to bring some really soft little strokes just down here to connect those bits, and going to do some soft little strokes just through here. Might want to just do a few little bits through that yellow bit there, just some longer bits to break that up a tad. Might do a few little bits just through that yellow on the edge. Again, just to add a little bit of texture. Then carry on, bring in some little bits really softly. It's more grey than it is brown at the bottom, so we don't want to try and completely cover the grey. We do want to have a little bit of that grey showing through. I'm just going to do some little soft strokes in the direction of all these little bits at the bottom of the feather. And I might just add a little bit of nougat at the bottom and blend it up really gently. A little bit coming down just to thicken up the bottom. And then same at this side, do a few more little soft fluffy strokes and blend through there. like that. So let's now darken up that brown area with a little bit of burnt umber 280, so our darker brown, and just going to go over the darker areas. So look at the reference, see where the darker bits are. We're going to darken those up with some extra strokes in the right direction, so always making sure that you're going in the direction that the little fluffy bits on the feather are growing, and just add in another layer to darken that up. Same on this middle bit, I might just darken up the centre a little bit more. And then I'm doing little first, well, say fur strokes, they are like fur strokes, but little feather strokes. Fur and feathers are very similar with the softness. It's just a case of the direction that everything goes in and all these little extra shapes that are in feathers. But yeah, it's like doing a fur stroke. You're just doing a little stroke and building it up really softly, lifting that pencil off over and over again to get a nice softness. I'm going to go over this bit. And a little bit at the bottom, and then I'm just going to keep bringing those bits to meet. And a little bit here. And I'm just going to add a few little bits through the bottom, but I'm not going to add too many because again I don't want to take away from the grey colour, so I might just concentrate it more to the ends, some of these little fluffy bits. Same on this side, just do a few little bits on the ends, not being afraid to cross everything over. Not really thinking too much, just going for it. Be confident with your strokes. As soon as you start being hesitant, that's when you start making mistakes and they don't quite go where you want them to go, so just go for it. A little bit from the centre just to darken that up a little. Might do a few little bits just going in random directions. That adds to the fluffiness. Might have been a bit too random there, but hey ho, it's all good. I'm going to start to darken that up now with a little bit of the dark brown grey colour, the dark sepia 175, and you guessed it, we're just going to do the exact same thing all over again. I'm going to darken up that centre. And I'm going to do some little strokes on top of the darker parts. Don't need to add as many of these as we did with the brown colours, just a few to darken it up a little bit more. I'm going to add a few here, a few there. A little bit at the top. A little bit through here. A few little darker bits at the bottom, I think. Because this does have that slightly grey undertone, it'll help to add a little bit of that grey colour back into the bottom. We definitely need a bit more up there. A little bit more just through here. A little bit more through there. A little bit more here. I think we need a bit more on this bit here. So I think we could also do with a little bit of an orange tone in the lighter bits of the feather at the top. So let's use the orange colour again, the Burnt Ochre 187, the one that we used in the last video as well. And just going to blend that through. So definitely more orange on that outside part there. Just blend that through there, and definitely a little bit more on this outside bit here as well. Might just add the tiniest little bit through those middle bits. And here. And I might just add a little bit of black. So black 199, I don't want to use a lot of the black, just a tiny little bit to darken up some of these really dark bits. Add the tiniest little bit through there. Shade that little bit there. Oh, definitely a little bit through the middle. Darken that up a bit more. A little bit at the top. Darken that up. And a bit through there. Through that middle bit. A little bit through there. might add a few little bits just here and there at the bottom. Just for an extra little bit of detail. And then let's just go back to our dark brown colour, so burnt umber 280. I'm going to add some little flecks of texture and detail just through here. You can see some little dots. I'm going to add those in for a tiny bit more detail to add to the realism. Some little bits in there. Okay, maybe go over that with a little bit of the dark brown grey colour, the dark sepia, that lovely dark colour, just to pick some of those out a little bit more. Okay, and then I'm just going to show you a little technique that I like to use in a lot of my drawings. Might not work too well on this because I haven't got loads and loads of layers, but this is a slice manual pen tool, and it's a little ceramic knife, and you can use it to pick out little details in drawings. So let's see, it might not work too well, but you see these little light bits in the feathers? I want to have a go at picking those back out, and what this does is it just takes off the top layer of the drawing. So this is entirely optional, this is just like an extra little bit at the end. And let's see, I'm just going to have a go at adding a little bit in there. Do you see how that just picks a little bit of that coloured pencil out, and it reveals the lighter colour at the bottom? So you can just use a normal craft knife for this, but these ceramic blades are really good because they don't cut the paper, they're not too sharp and cut the paper, so they're really good for things like this. I'm just going to add a few little lighter bits. I might have to go over some of it again. I'm going to add a little bit there. So I'm not cutting the paper, I'm just adding little bits of detail by lifting off the top layers. I'm just going to add a little bit more of my light brown just back in here. I feel like I've gone a bit too far. And I feel like I've just gone a little bit too dark with the colour there. So I'm just going to use my little pencil eraser and just lift that out a little bit to soften it up. You can use erasers and knives and all sorts of stuff as extra tools to perfect your drawing. They're not always for mistakes. Sometimes you can just use them to add little extra details and blend it a little bit more. It's not always, oh, I need to erase my mistakes out. So you can use your tools to your advantage and really like refine and perfect everything at the end. I might just lighten that up a little bit there too. Might just soften it up a little bit more. Okie dokie. And I think that looks pretty good. I'm not going to go too much further with that. I feel like I'm really pleased with how this one's turned out. So yeah, another 3 studies completed in this video. I really hope you enjoyed drawing these with me and you're excited for whatever next. So I've still got some references. Can do a few more studies, so stick around for that soon. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please make sure to give this video a like as it helps my channel out. Subscribe to see the next part and more future tutorials like this, and I'll see you very soon. Bye for now.